The late afternoon sun poured through the wide glass windows of Pemberton's Bistro, a celebrated fine dining establishment in Portland, Oregon. Inside, the soft notes of a live pianist blended with the quiet murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. The air was one of refined celebration, the kind of place where people marked milestones or sealed lucrative deals. Amid this polished scene, an elderly black woman entered. She walked with deliberate steps, her navy blue coat with embroidered cuffs hinting at an understated elegance. Her small black handbag was tucked under her arm, and her expression was calm but authoritative. The hostess greeted her with a polite, if slightly strained, smile. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" the hostess asked. "Yes, under the name Mrs. Holloway," the woman replied, her voice steady and polite. The hostess found the name on her list and led Mrs. Holloway to a table near the kitchen, a less desirable spot. Mrs. Holloway didn't protest. She took her seat and quietly scanned the menu. But as minutes ticked by, something became clear. She was being overlooked. Todd, a waiter in his late 20s, repeatedly walked past her table, smiling and chatting with other patrons but barely sparing her a glance. When he finally approached, his tone was brisk and dismissive. "Sorry for the wait," he said curtly. "We're really busy right now. I'll be back in a bit to take your order." Mrs. Holloway nodded graciously, even as nearby tables received prompt service. She noticed the whispers and sidelong glances from other diners, the barely hidden curiosity or judgment, till she remained composed. As Todd continued to ignore her, a man seated at the bar took notice. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer, his piercing gaze followed the interactions, or lack thereof. This was Elijah Holloway, the restaurant's owner. He watched as his mother sat patiently, enduring the subtle slights with dignity. Elijah felt a slow burn of anger. This wasn't just any guest being mistreated. It was his mother, the woman who had taught him everything about respect, integrity, and perseverance. He signaled Dana, the manager, and whispered, "Keep an eye on table 12. Don't intervene yet. I want to see how far this goes." Dana hesitated but nodded. She trusted Elijah's instincts, though the tension in the room was becoming palpable. Other diners had begun to notice, too. A young couple whispered about the lack of service at Mrs. Holloway's table, their discomfort evident. When Todd finally returned, he addressed Mrs. Holloway with the same dismissive tone. "Still haven't decided?" he asked, as if the delay were her fault. "I'm ready to order whenever you have a moment," she replied, her voice calm and measured. Todd muttered something under his breath and walked away. That was the breaking point for Elijah. Rising from his seat, he crossed the room with deliberate steps, his presence commanding attention. He reached Todd just as the waiter was laughing with another table. "Todd," Elijah said, his voice low but firm. Todd turned, his smile faltering. "Oh, Elijah. I didn't realize you were here." "I've been here," Elijah replied evenly. "And I've been watching." Todd's confusion turned to unease. "Watching what?" "Watching you ignore my mother," Elijah said, his tone sharpening. "The woman you've treated like an inconvenience for the past 30 minutes. The woman you assumed didn't matter." The room fell silent. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. Todd's face went pale as he glanced toward Mrs. Holloway, who was now observing the scene with quiet composure. "Your mother?" Todd stammered. "Yes," Elijah said. "And everyone here has seen how you've treated her. Save your excuses. Dana, take over table 12 and ensure my mother has everything she needs." Dana nodded and hurried to Mrs. Holloway's table, apologizing profusely as she filled her water glass and took her order. Elijah turned back to Todd. "You're done for the day," Elijah said. "Go home. We'll talk about your future here tomorrow." Todd untied his apron and left, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. Elijah approached his mother's table, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. Mrs. Holloway smiled, her hand patting his. "I'm fine, son. You handled that well." Elijah exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I should have stepped in sooner." No, she replied gently. You let him reveal his character. Sometimes that's more powerful. The rest of the evening continued with a more attentive and thoughtful staff. The diners who had witnessed the incident seemed reflective, their conversations quieter but more purposeful. When Mrs. Holloway finished her meal, Elijah walked her to the door. You've built something beautiful here, she said as they stood in the evening air. Remember, it's not just about the food or the ambience. It's about how people feel when they walk through those doors. Elijah nodded, her words settling deep within him. As she got into her car, she offered him one last smile. Inside, Dana gathered the staff, her tone serious but constructive. Tonight was a lesson, she said. This place isn't just about serving meals. It's about serving people with respect, no exceptions. As Elijah closed the restaurant that night, he resolved to ensure Pemberton's Bistro upheld the values his mother had taught him. It wasn't just about avoiding another incident. It was about creating a culture where dignity and kindness were non-negotiable, values that would echo long after the last plate was cleared. The following morning, Elijah arrived at the restaurant early. As he walked through the dining room, he replayed the events of the previous evening in his mind. He found himself standing at table 12, the corner where his mother had sat. It was just an empty space now, but it felt weighted with significance. Dana joined him moments later. Morning, she greeted softly. Morning, Elijah replied. Did you talk to the staff after the shift? I did, Dana said. They understand. I think it hit home for everyone. Elijah nodded. Good. Because what happened can't happen again. By the time the staff arrived, Elijah had gathered them for a brief meeting. Todd wasn't present, but Elijah knew he'd have to deal with him later. For now, he focused on the team. What happened last night is unacceptable, Elijah began, his voice steady but firm. It's not just about my mother. It's about every guest who walks through those doors. This isn't just a restaurant. It's a place where people should feel welcome, respected, and valued. The staff listened intently, some nodding in agreement. Elijah continued, We're not just serving food. We're creating an experience. And that experience starts with kindness and respect. No exceptions. As the team dispersed to prepare for the day, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that true change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was committed to fostering a culture of integrity and empathy. And he knew his mother would be proud. Weeks later, the story of that evening had spread beyond the walls of Pemberton's Bistro. Regular patrons spoke of the restaurant's transformation, not just in service but in atmosphere. There was a warmth, a sense of community that hadn't been as palpable before. Mrs. Holloway's quiet grace and Elijah's firm leadership had left a lasting mark.